Hi there once again and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And this is number 7 in the series of Expresso nuts and bolts. Now on the screen you can see that we've got a message playing, and that's what we're about in this tutorial. We're about creating this, and we're going to be using a node that we've not seen before, which is another of the preset nodes, and this is the time control. That's what we're about in this tutorial, so without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. So in our scene, we've got a background object here, which I've just placed a texture on it, and it's a simple texture with just a gradient, just a circular gradient, and I've put a bit of turbulence in it and changed the colours and moved things around to give us the effect that I want. Some mo text here, which is going to provide the message as and when we need it to. And again, I've got a texture on it. It's just a basic colour, a luminance. It doesn't really need the reflectance, to be quite honest with you. The luminance is just to give it a little bit of extra whiteness, down to around 77% there. That's all I've done there. And then a camera, which I've got a protection tag on so that it's pointing in the correct direction and doesn't move. And then simply a null, which I'm going to put my Expresso tag on. So let's get the Expresso tag. That's great. So we've now got the Expresso editor open and we're ready to start work. The first thing I'm going to do is open up my system presets, come down to animation and time, and we've got a time control in there. Now we've already looked at the action timer and the rotate, so this is the third node in here and the final node within the animation and time. So we'll bring this one in, and we can see that we've got 2 inputs at the input stage and 1 output at the output stage. So how does this work? Well, you can think of this as being like a time switch, because the start frame and stop frame, we can set these up in here and of course feed them times from elsewhere, which is what we're actually going to be doing. But if we set our stop frame to 30 and we get a result node so that we can see what the bool is actually doing, and we'll plumb that output there into the result. Now at the moment we've got a 1 in there because of course we're starting at frame 0, which we've got on the timeline, and we're going to frame 30. So at any point between 0 and 30, we're always going to be getting an output of 1. But if we set our timeline to 31 frames, we now get a 0 because we're outside this time range here. So that's how this works. Whenever we're within the time range, we get a 1 at the output. As soon as we're outside of it, we get a 0, and it's effectively literally like a switch that's controlled by time. So how are we going to use this to do something a little bit more interesting than just checking our time values? Well, we'll start off by bringing in a time node. So we'll come down to our general menu time, bring one of those in, and add a frame port and remove the time port. Okay, so we've got that set up. I'm just going to make sure we're viewing this at 100%. That's better. Okay, great. So we've got that in. The next thing is to get a couple of compare nodes. So we'll come down to logic compare, bring one of those in, and command drag to copy so that we've got 2 of them. Now the bottom one we can leave as equal to 0. We'll just plumb the frame into there, into input 1. So we can say equal to 0 at input 2, that's fine, because all we're going to be using this particular compare for is to reset the value of a monoflop, because we're going to be using a monoflop as a counter and we'll want to reset that at frame 0. Now this one we'll plumb into there too, and this one wants to be greater than or equal to, and it will be 75, and that will become, well, the reason for that will become apparent very shortly. The next thing to bring in is a math modulo, so I'll get a math node, bring one of those in and set its function to modulo. Again, I'll connect the frame to the first input, and in input number 2 I'm going to set this to 75 as well. So that's set up so far. Now the next thing to do is bring in a condition, and we're going to be using the compare here to switch the condition. Now our input 2 we're going to leave at 0, and our input 3 I'm going to plumb the output of the modulo into there. So what's going to happen then, for the first 75 frames, we're going to be using a 0, or we want a 0 at the output. After there, we want whatever's coming out of the modulo, and the modulo is going to produce a 1 every 75 frames. So at 75 frames, we're going to get a 1 at the output, which is exactly what we need to drive our monoflop, which I'm going to bring in next. So let's just move this over here, just make the window a little bit bigger so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, let's get that monoflop. So we'll bring that in. We can just add a reset at the input stage, and at the output stage we need a count. Because as I said, we're using this as a counter, we're not going to use it as anything else. Now the monoflop is currently set up, its mode is normal. We don't want that. We want a one-shot monoflop because we want this to be triggered when we get a 1 at this input. So we'll plumb the output of the condition into there, and that will give us our 1 at specific times. But for the first 75 frames, we're going to get a 0. So the monoflop's not going to be doing anything. It's not going to be counting. It will be set to 0 for the first 75 frames. Moving on from here, we can just plumb in this compare, as I said, so that when we're back at 0, we can reset the monoflop. We can reset this counter. So that's the first part of our expression set up. Moving on from here, I need 3 condition nodes, so we'll bring those in. Before we copy them, I'm going to add some inputs here. I need 4 more inputs, so I'll add those because each condition needs 6 inputs. I can then command drag to copy, make the window a little bigger, and then command drag to copy again. Let's just go down there, make that the full size. Okay, great. Now the count output here is going to be driving the switches, so we'll plumb those in for a start, just get that done. And then these top 2 are set up as they need to be because they do need real values, because we're going to be setting our start and stop frame values in these 2. And then the third one here, that needs to be set to string because this will be the one that we're going to be using to deliver our message. So that's those set up. So in our first condition here, we can set up our start frame values. So we'll start with 0. We'll then add 75 to each of them. So it was 75, 150, 225, 300, and finally 375. So they're our start frame values, and we can plumb those into here. Our second condition will feature our stop frame values, and these will be 60. So you can see, before we go any further, that we're going from 0 to 60 at the time that we're going to stop. And then we're going to start again at 75 frames. So what we're doing here, we're allowing our message to be displayed, or each line of our message to be displayed for 2 seconds or 60 frames. And then we're going to have a break of 15 frames or half a second. And then we'll go on to display the next line. So that's how we're going to set these up, so that there's a half a second gap between each line. So 60 frames, and then we'll add 75 to that so that we get 135, 210, 285, 360, and finally 435. And that gives us our correct intervals. So we can plumb that into our stop frame. We can now think about setting up the text in our condition. Now the first input we're going to leave blank, so there's going to be a pause of 75 frames before we see anything. You don't have to do that. You can put something in there if you wish. I mean, you don't even have to put the same message as me, obviously. But anyway, so the first one we're going to leave blank. I'm then going to say hello there. Welcome to Expresso Mechanic TV. Here's hoping you learn something useful or something new. Let's say something new, make it a little bit smaller there. So something new. Now sit back enjoy the show. Okay, so that's our text in. Let's just make sure we've spelled everything correctly. Welcome needs an E, not an R. Welcome to Expresso Mechanic TV, that's fine. Yep, here's hoping you learn, so put a capital on you. You learn something new. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Yeah, I think it looks okay. Right, so that's our text ready to go. So the next thing to do then is to bring in the text. We'll get that brought in and we'll add a couple of ports. Now, the basic properties, we're going to say visible in editor. You can, of course, say visible in renderer too if you wish to render it out, but I'm just going to say visible in editor. And then in the object properties, text spline. Now, to finish this off completely, we just need one more node, and that will be a not from the bool menu. Because we're getting a 1 when this is switched on. Now, we need actually to feed the visible in editor a 0 to make the text visible. So we need the not to turn the 1 here into a 0 at the output. So we'll plumb that into there and plumb that into there, and now that's all set up. And then the final step is to just connect the output of here to the text spline in the text there. And that's it. That's what we need to do. So let's just make the window bigger so that we can see the whole expression, and then I'll just close this down for now and we'll run the animation and see if it's actually doing what it should be doing. Let's just close these materials, bring this back to 0, and let's just see what happens. There we go. Yep, all working perfectly well, and it loops and it will carry on going. And there you go. And that is how you do it. That's how you create a message that can be placed upon the screen like this. So let's just stop that, open our expression up again, and we can have a quick look at it. So perfectly simple, really. We've got a frame or in our time node, so that we're getting the frames from the timeline. We're passing them to a compare. So if we said for the first 75 frames, we don't want this counter to change. We want it to be 0. And that's why we've got the condition set up, so that we only switch the condition at 75 frames. The modulo will be generating a 1, which synchronizes, it triggers, and then we start to produce the message. And of course, because we're greater than 75 frames, from that moment onwards, we're always using the modulo. And that's why we get the trigger, triggering the actual start times and stop times and our message at the correct time. The compare at the bottom here is just to reset things when we take our frame back to 0. And that's it, really. It's as simple as that. So the all-important node is the time control. That's the really important node here. And hopefully you can come up with some other ideas for using this to do various different things within your own animations. I mean, you could use it to trigger another monoflop, which is has the state in it and drives a range mapper and causes an animation to happen at certain times. So you could do something like that with it. But have a think about it and see what you can come up with. But yeah, that about wraps this tutorial up, because that's as much as I wanted to show you. So as per usual, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you found it useful, then please give the video a thumbs up, and of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment and ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please do share this video, because all of this good stuff helps to keep the channel going in the right direction. But anyway, that just about wraps this one up, so I hope you've got something out of it, and I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.